Hello and welcome to Bud's RPG Review, where I give my thoughts on role-playing games, card games and board games. Today's review is Harlem Unbound for Gumshoe and Call of Cthulhu 7th edition by Darker Hue Studios. Okay, first a bit of history. Released in 2016, Harlem Unbound is a 276-page sourcebook that introduces the mythos and jazz-soaked streets of Harlem to Call of Cthulhu. Since its release, Chaosium have picked it up and asked the author, Chris Spivey, to write a second edition. This is the hardback first edition that I backed in its successful Kickstarter. Okay, to the cover. I think this is a very divisive piece by Brennan Reese that some will hate, but that I absolutely love. The contrasting red, white and black makes it really stand out from the crowd, and it has a style that you probably won't see elsewhere. Right, to the inside. Following the credits and the author's dedication, we get to the content page. Here it tells us that anything displayed in red text is Gumshoe related, red writing in brackets denoting skills and checks. We have an introduction, In Their Footsteps, which sets the scene on what we can expect, and some discussion on the idea that part of the intention of the book is to flip the Lovecraftian view of minorities and their own struggles against the cosmic horrors inherent to this reality, as well as their own struggles for equality. The book is set at the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance, and the players are actively encouraged to play minorities and walk a mile in their shoes to experience what life was like in this period. The writer stresses that the book was written in a manner respectful to the experience of people of this time. Next up is The Song of Harlem. Here it discusses the history of Harlem, combining the real-world history with a Lovecraft take. It is described as a place where black people could have their dignity, a place where they could stand tall and experience all manner of art and life amongst their fellows. It talks about how the Great Depression ended the Renaissance, the race riot of 1935, and Harlem being the launching point for the civil rights movement and a place of pilgrimage for the likes of Martin Luther King Jr. It goes into the deeper history of Harlem and even delves into the native tribes and mentions the Wappinger turning to the worship of the black man and avatar of Nyarlathotep, and how their fate was sealed in the September of 1609 by the arrival of the Dutch trading ship Half Moon and the Dutch settlers that bought Manhattan Island for 60 guilders worth of iron and blankets. It goes into the subsequent creation of New Amsterdam, and the Harlem was originally called Zedendal or Blessed Valley. Unfortunately, the Lenape tribe took poorly to the newcomers and drove the settlers back to New Amsterdam. The Lenape were driven back over time by the overwhelming numbers of the Dutch, and the Dutch lands were restored by African slaves brought over by the Dutch West India Company, and also the arrival of the English settlers. It was only when Peter Stuyvesant assumed the post of Director General that the fortunes of New Amsterdam changed from profit to settlement, from exploitation to culture. He divided the land into lots and encouraged farmers to settle. The Harlemites sent their children to negotiate with the Native American hunters who provided them with venison and crab, and the children began learning the Algonquian languages. It talks about how Stuyvesant named the settlement Harlem in 1664 and how he surrendered the settlement and all related cities to the British without a blow or tears. At first, relatively few black people lived in New Harlem, and much of the economic activity of Manhattan was fueled by slave labour. Black slaves were brought in huge numbers, and those that found their way to Harlem lived a relatively peaceful life. Harlem became a place that escaped slaves fled to, as well as a spot for the idle rich of New York in large manor estates. Occult practices were driven underground by the English constabulary tradition. Most Harlemites supported independence from Britain, and George Washington turned Harlem into a fortified camp during the Revolution. The Battle of Harlem Heights was Washington's first success in the war, although the British returned 2 months later and razed Harlem to the ground, leaving a ghost town for the rest of the war. Although Harlem was slow to recover, by 1900 tens of thousands of black residents lived there, alongside poor Irish, Italians and Jews. Building of tenement blocks was halted during World War I, and it wasn't until Philip Payton formed the Afro-American Realty Company that Harlem began to boom. By 1910, 1 in 10 residents were black. By 1920, it was 1 in 3. Black people migrated to Harlem to seek out a better life. By 1916, and the opening of Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, the Renaissance was in full swing. In under 20 years, Harlem had gone from a Jewish and Italian neighbourhood to the home of 84,000 black people and a centre for black experience in America. Although this was happening, white audiences wanted a piece of it, with places like the Cotton Club being open only to whites, and Harlem can be best imagined as a place of exploitation and reinvention. Following this section, we have a timeline of Harlem, from 200 million years ago with the Migo visiting Earth, right through to 1919 and this book. Next, we have Harlem herself. This gives a rundown of the places of interest here, with an adventure hook underneath. It describes all of the pertinent places of interest such as Sugar Hill, Jungle Alley and Golden Edge, and this is followed by a section on the people of Harlem, Harlemites. It gives us notes on how to create a character here with tables to roll on for the character's background and drives. This is followed by examples of occupations of residents of Harlem. Some you may expect such as musicians, artists and writers, and others of which you may not expect such as the hellfighter and even rabbi. The story of the Harlem Hellfighters is one of bravery and patriotism from a country that cared little for them, and it's not something I'm going to go into here, as I want to encourage people to find out about these brave souls of their own volition. This is followed by a page on Call of Cthulhu skills, and then a section on Gumshoe. Here it details the various pertinent skills that this system uses, and gives full descriptions of what players and keepers should expect. After this we have a section called System Stuff. It is here where it deals with the Gumshoe rules for this setting, including combat, contests, the mythos itself, sanity, and also the new mechanic that is introduced called racial tension. We then have a section on storytelling. Here the author talks about the struggle of African Americans and discusses racism in real life and in the game, giving notes on the Jim Crow laws and the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. It talks about how white players should approach playing black characters and discusses using the very worst of racial slurs, the M-word, in game, stating that non-black players should never say it and even black players should be wary of it. This is an excellent point in that racial slurs of any type shouldn't be used by probably anyone ever. However, I do think that most smart, right-thinking people already know this, and the type of player that would flagrantly do so with a complete disregard of the historical context of the M-word would probably be someone you wouldn't want at your table anyway. It goes through designing scenarios in Harlem and gives the usual notes that you would expect on all of the different kinds of considerations that you should have, with extra notes concerning Gumshoe. This is followed by sample mythos and supernatural entities. Here, it gives us a few new threats to use against the players, such as the Baron in Blues, who's an avatar of Azathoth that, to be honest, I found a bit corny, as he uses a six-valved horn to destroy his foes with music. And we also have golems, which are traditionally from Jewish folklore, and that I assume are here due to the Jewish influence in Harlem, and a Sukiyant, a type of shape-shifting vampire witch that wears human skin as a disguise that are from the Caribbean. After this we have the Duppy, which is a type of ghost that can assume a human or animal form, and the Zombie, a creature that is the living turned to near death through the use of drugs, magic and occult knowledge. After this we have some more of the usual things like the gangster and rabbit dogs, a rival pianist, and even the generic monstrosity. The next section details scenario hooks. Here it gives us 3 short investigations that should only take a night or 2 to run, that a stuck keeper can pull together in a pinch, or maybe to introduce players to the streets of Harlem. They're quite nicely put together, with the big bads fully statted out. After this we have a 4d6 scenario generator that offers multiple possibilities for someone wanting to put something together in a rush. The following section is supporting cast. Here it details a number of characters with interesting backstories that can also be used as replacement characters. It also introduces us to new cities that join the Lovecraftian landscape, Attucks and Harbour Mill. The new characters are fully statted out and present people of varied skin colours and backgrounds. Perhaps the most interesting character is Gentry Fingers Price. He has the physical body of a man that is inhabited by the spirit of his dead wife, who is trying to track down the spirit of her husband and is at her wit's end. It gives us some interesting characters with no stat block but interesting backstories, and then moves on to the scenarios of Harlem Unbound. Now, I'm not going to spoil the scenarios, but I will give you a brief overview. The first one is Harlem Hellfighters Never Die. This is set in Prohibition New York and involves war heroes being hunted down by a powerful sorcerer who wants them for the mythos energy that they inadvertently absorb during a battle. This scenario also has some quite excellent handouts. The second scenario is Harlem Knights. This is about a previously banished ancient evil returning and pulling an Italian gang under its control. It's very sandboxy in nature and covers many interesting locations in Harlem, and it's definitely advised that any budding keeper should read this a couple of times, as there's a lot going on. As per the previous scenario, this also contains an excellent selection of handouts. The third scenario is The Contender, a love story. This is the sad tale of a retired boxer who was unfortunate enough to marry an Innsmouth woman and having a child of deep one lineage, who, as he is getting older, is losing all remnants of his humanity. I would honestly say that this was my favourite scenario of the 4, as it has a particularly satisfying ending depending on your point of view. The fourth scenario is Dreams and Broken Wings. This is Harlem's first foray into the dreamland and is very well done, and it ties in with the Harlem Renaissance, also introducing the spiritual practice of hoodoo as a vehicle to carry the dreamland's narrative. As with the other scenarios, this doesn't feel like your average Call of Cthulhu. They are bittersweet at times, which is much to the writer's credit. After the scenarios, we have a section on the souls of Harlem. This is where we get into the different communities that exist and includes a number of genuine historical figures for you to read about, from important political figures such as Marcus Garvey to the millionaire Alelia Walker. It gives us details on famous authors, poets and artists, as well as famous musicians like Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong. It covers actors and performers such as Paul Robeson and Harry Houdini, and even has a section on various infamous mob bosses of the time. It also has sports teams of the period and a section on famous clubs. This is followed by a glossary of Harlemese terms that should prove invaluable to someone wanting to give their players a more authentic experience. And then we have a bibliography of important reference points, a list of all the Kickstarter backers, including yours truly, and some recommended media. After this, we have a timeline of important events in Harlem, taking us from 1919 to 1940, and finally a Gumshoe character sheet, a map that includes Harlem in Lovecraft Country, and a Harlem Unbound Call of Cthulhu 7th edition character sheet. At this point, I feel it is fair to mention that the book isn't without issues. Firstly, a fold-out map of Harlem would have been fantastic, but it's more around the content of one of the scenarios. In the scenario of The Contender, a love story, a racial slur that is used against people of Italian descent is used twice, and as the concept around Harlem Unbound is one of inclusivity, I found this a bit odd, as it's not a slur that has been lost to time in such a way as to be meaningless to a modern audience. With this in mind, I reached out to the author Chris Spivey and asked why it had been included. Chris, to his credit, got back to me fairly quickly, advised that he had stressed to the authors about making the book as inclusive as possible, and it was not a word that he was familiar with and that it was missed during the editing process. He said that he takes the blame for its inclusion and that it has been corrected for the upcoming second edition. It's also worth mentioning that Chris did not write the scenario in question. Harlem Unbound is quite frankly one of the best source books for Call of Cthulhu that I've read to date. It breathes life into the jazz-soaked streets of Harlem in such an evocative way that left me asking myself, why has nobody done this before? The writing is excellent throughout, with some passages having an almost sing-song quality to them. The book itself is a beautiful premium product with thick paper, stunning art, and a bold colour scheme that shouts from the rooftops that Harlem has arrived and is here to stay. The scenarios are really well done, with The Contender love story standing out for me as the most memorable I've read in a long time, and the whole thing screams pride on the author's behalf. What makes this even more special is that this is Darker Hue Studios' first book. The long-held philosophy that you can love the art but not the artist is clear here. The fact that Lovecraft held fairly primitive racial beliefs is a point that I feel doesn't need to be discussed any further, as the people who care already know this, and Harlem Unbound casts aside these prejudices with aplomb. The history of Harlem and the struggle of black people is compellingly written, and the sad story of the Harlem Hellfighters actually made me feel angry at times. The new monsters that are introduced fit the setting perfectly, and the whole package is just wonderful. The inclusion of Gumshoe rules was not something I really enjoyed, but was something that I could easily put up with, as everything else was so good. Harlem Unbound takes Call of Cthulhu in a wonderful new direction, and is one that I look forward to seeing more of. I give Harlem Unbound a 9.5 out of 10. If you enjoyed this review, please make sure to hit the thumbs up, subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos. Also, if you're interested in buying this product, I'll put some links below. Lastly, if you enjoy what I produce here, then maybe think about supporting me on Patreon. Bud out.